So now that we've looked at how to get the font that you want, it's time to look at how to actually style the text. So we're going to be working with text properties. These are things like if you want to indent a paragraph, create superscript or subscript, create more space between each letter of a headline, and there's other formatting tasks that we'll be discussing using CSS. Basically, as far as the text properties go, there are 8 related properties: text indent, letter spacing, word spacing, text decoration, text align, line height, text transform, and vertical align. So let's take a couple moments and look at all of these 8 different properties. We'll start with text indentation. This is the page in the web browser that we're going to be working with, and this is my code for this particular page right here. So you can see the code that's been generated right here. And basically this is really straightforward, same type of file that we've been starting with all along. I did go ahead and create a style for the body, and I just styled the font so it would be a little bit easier for us to look at out here in our browser. I'm just going to go ahead and turn off my toolbars here so we have a little more real estate as well. So let's start with working with the text indent. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to create inline styles for the paragraphs only so we can see how this is going to affect the various elements, and we'll just kind of use classes so we can apply it to paragraphs that we're interested in. So back here in my XHTML, I'm going to go ahead and define a style for paragraph only, and then I'm going to put a period, and I'll just call this one text indent since this is what I want to do. You may remember that by defining the tag prior to the name of the class, it's going to only really affect the paragraphs, which is kind of nice because here I'm isolating it to affect paragraphs. So if I put a class on the paragraph and the header, and I'll demonstrate this in a moment, it will only affect the paragraph. I'm going to come in here and I'll go ahead and write the declaration. So I'm going to go ahead and use text indent, and there's always a space or a dash between the name right there, and then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to put in a value. I'm going to be using M's, so I'm going to use 2 M's, and then I'll terminate with my semicolon, and I already have my closing curly brace. So of course if I save and we refresh in the browser, this does nothing right now because all I've done is basically defined the actual rule that I want to use. The next thing that I need to do is I need to assign this particular rule to something. So we'll come down here, we'll go to our paragraph tag right here, and we'll go ahead and we'll assign this on to the paragraph tag. Before I actually assign the class to the paragraph tag, let's just try putting the span on our H3 tag. Not real sure why I have a break like right there. Let's just get rid of that. So here's my H3 tag right here, and then here's the first paragraph that starts talking about text indentation. So if I go ahead and I create a span tag right here, and remember those are just null tags that you can basically assign anything on, and then I'm going to assign a class, and the class that I'm going to use is going to be text indent, and then I will close this, and then I'll put a closing span tag over here. So if I save the page and we refresh the page, you're going to see that it doesn't really do much over here. And the reason why is because I specifically created my style so that it's going to only affect P. If I get rid of the P right here, so if we delete this and I save, and now we refresh, you're going to see that both the first line of the header, which there's only one line, gets indented, and the first line of the paragraph also gets indented. So this is kind of another interesting way that you can use CSS. I'm going to leave my P in there, and I'm going to get rid of this span tag, so I'll delete the span tag, and then what I'm going to do, we'll just cut this right here, is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to assign the class to the P tag, so P with a class of text indent. Now if I save and we refresh in the browser, you're going to see how my H3 tag is outdented. It's how it should be. It's not being affected. And then of course the indent is always only happening right here. When you do text indent, it's going to indent the first line of any paragraph. So if this had multiple lines right here, like if I come back down here and I'm just going to copy this exact same paragraph in my code. So let's come back to our code and copy the same paragraph. And if I just paste it in again, and you can see that I'm using the class indent on the second paragraph, both starting points of the paragraph are indented. So this might be more something that you're more used to seeing in regular page layout programs when you wanted to break up text. Now, this can be very helpful just visually to help break out text. It does look a little funny when I just have one line right here, but if my paragraph happened to be longer, and I could do that by basically deleting that so it wraps onto a couple more lines, you can see that now it's just indented right there. So this can certainly be helpful to use text indentation, and you can think of the best way that you may want to use that. I'm going to get rid of the second sentence since it doesn't make much sense and go back to what I originally had. So basically, text indent can be applied anyways to block level elements like paragraphs and header tags, which we just saw, and it defines the amount of indentation that the first line of the element should receive. Let's move on to letter spacing. Letter spacing is a property that defines the additional amount of space between characters. This is basically tracking. So it's the overall space between your letters. The value must be in some sort of length format. Negative values are permitted. So you can use negative values when you use letter spacing. I would definitely recommend that you use relative values when you're dealing with letter spacing. Relative values are things like percentages or ems rather than an absolute value like a pixel or an inch, so that the spacing is going to remain proportional if the user changes the font size. That could become important if the user is going to size up or size down the fonts on the web space. Letter spacing gives you a lot more control and can definitely give you a more professional touch by tightening up headlines. A lot of times you'll want to tighten up your headlines, or just in certain situations you might want to change the letter spacing. Headlines are nice to tighten up because sometimes when your text gets a lot larger, the tracking of the letters starts to get a little more loose and it doesn't look quite as professional. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to create a style so that we can control our letter spacing. And once again, for this example, we're just going to be applying everything to the paragraph tag because I think it's a little bit easier to see. So I'm going to do the same thing I did before, p dot, and then I'll come up with my name, and I'm going to call this one letter spacing, and I'll open my curly brace and close my curly brace, and then the declaration that I want to declare is going to be letter dash spacing, and then I'm going to go ahead and choose a value, and I'm going to use ems again, so I'm going to use 0.5 em semicolon. And then we need to go ahead and specify a paragraph that we want to apply this to. So we'll come down here and we'll put it on the paragraph that talks about letter spacing. So I'm just going to go ahead and assign a class. And the class that I want to assign is going to be letter spacing. And I don't have to do a closing tag when I'm using the class within a tag because my p tag is closed right here. And so that can definitely be helpful. I'll save my page and we'll refresh in the browser, and you can see that now all the letters have a lot more spacing. Obviously in this example it does make it a little more difficult to read my text, so this is probably going overboard a bit, but I wanted to show you how this works so you could get a feel. You can always adjust down too, like if I decide that is too much. Well, let's try going to 0.25 ems, which is going to be about half as much, and now you can see it tightens up a little bit, but obviously there's quite a bit more spacing than the default values right there. And if we used negative numbers, so if I simply just change this to a negative and I save, you'll see that now all the letters get squished together and they basically become unreadable here because that's quite a bit of negative letter spacing. So we'll just take that off and we'll just use 0.25 so that we can still read this in case that would be of interest to you. All right, the next thing that we want to talk about is word spacing. And word spacing is basically the property that defines additional amount of space between words. It's very similar to letter spacing, except that the space changes between each word rather than each letter. The value must be in some sort of length format, and once again, negative values are allowed or permitted. So let's go ahead and let's go back to our XHTML and let's create a style for the word spacing. So I'll put p.word spacing, open my curly brace and close my curly brace, and then let's go ahead and define the style. We're going to type word spacing, and then I will go ahead and put the word spacing, and let's just try 2M as a value to start off with. So I'll save this, and actually I need to apply it to a paragraph so we can see it actually happening. I'm just going to put some spaces in between my paragraphs so you guys can read these a little bit better. I'm going to come into the paragraph and I'll go ahead and assign a class, and the class that I want to assign is called word spacing, and I need to make sure that I capitalize any letters that when I created my style the exact same way, which I did. So I'm going to save, and we'll come here and we'll refresh, and you can see how now we have a bunch of space between the words. So it actually gives space between the words. And obviously if we made that a negative number just like we did before, let's try to use something a little bit less, like maybe -0.1 or something like that. M's. You can see that if I refresh, it starts to make a lot less space between the words. So a lot of control that you can have here. It definitely is something that you can have fun with, and it's nice to be able to have this sort of control when you're building a page, because you can really refine and make something look exactly the way you want. The next item on our list is text decoration. The text decoration property allows text to be decorated through one of 5 properties. The properties that you are able to identify are underline, overline, line through, blink, and I definitely beg you not to use blink because it's really annoying, or the default, which is just none. And the reason that you have none available is because let's say that text did have a text decoration assigned to it, there may be a point in time where you want to remove that in a specific instance. You can go ahead and create a style that has the text decoration set to none, and then you could remove that style to something that maybe had text decoration on it. So that definitely becomes important. The primary application of text decoration is controlling the underlining of links. So you might see that when you visit a web page, there'll be links and they won't have the traditional underline. You can remove the underline. This is a wonderful feature when you're making custom navigation with pure CSS type layout, because you can really make something so it doesn't look like a standard link that has an underline on it. And as we progress through the course, we'll use that a lot more. I would definitely encourage you to not underline text that is not a link. That's very confusing to a user, because most people identify a link as being underlined by default or being a different color or something like that. And if it is underlined and not a link, they'll probably want to try to click it. So, underlining might not be the best thing if something is not a link to use. So let's go ahead and let's make a text decoration to use. And we'll use something other than underlining just because we've kind of talked about the underlining before in this course, and we'll be working a lot with it because we're going to use it a lot when we style links. So I'm going to use text decoration, and I'm going to assign it to the P, and it is text dash decoration, and then I need to specify what it is, and we'll go ahead and we'll use the line through. Line through is a way that you can kind of like strike out something. This could be useful if you had a website where you wanted to show like reduction in price. It was $20 and now it's $15. You could strike through the $20. That might be an application of it. I'm just of course going to assign it to my whole paragraph because this will be a way that we can actually see it in action. And I'm just putting some space in between my paragraphs. So let's just put it on this first paragraph right here. I'll go ahead and assign a class, and I'm going to use my class of text decoration just like I specified in my CSS. We'll save the page, and we'll come here and we'll refresh, and you can see how this line of text now has a line through it like it's been crossed out. So this is text decoration, and then underline would underline something, overline puts a line on top of something. A blink, of course, is going to make it blink. I don't want to see that on anyone's web page. Just don't show me if you feel compelled to use it, or just don't use it at all, or then of course none. So that's text decoration. The next item to talk about is TextAlign. TextAlign can be applied to block level elements, so those are things like P and H1, and they give alignment to the element's text. This property is very similar to HTML's align attribute on paragraphs, headings, divisions, whatever you might have applied it to. Keep in mind that text aligns horizontally with respect to the containing element. So if you wanted an H1 headline centered within a div, you need to set the text align of, the div, not necessarily of the H1. And when we start working a little bit more with divs, we'll discuss that. But you can certainly change the default alignment of text, which of course is left aligned. You can make it right aligned, justified, or center, and then of course left if you needed to, which is the default setting. So let's go ahead and let's make a style for text alignment. I'm going to come back up here and we'll go ahead and specify this. So p.text, I'm just going to call it TextAlign. And the text alignment that we'll use, let's just do a text alignment of right. So I'm going to do text-align, colon, and then I will choose right. And I'll terminate with my semicolon as usual. Let's go down and let's apply this to a paragraph. So here's where I talk about text alignment. I'm going to come to this paragraph right here and create my class, and TextAlign is the class we created. So if I come back here, this property, or this paragraph, which is left aligned, when we reload the page, is now right aligned. So this can be very useful to change the alignment on text. I think you'll get quite a bit of use out of that as well. The next one in our list is LineHeight. LineHeight is basically the CSS equivalent to leading. It's the space between the lines of a block of text. Leading is defined not as the height of the space between the lines, but as the distance between the baseline of one line and the baseline of the next line. When the value is a number, the line height is calculated by multiplying the element's font size by that number. Percentage values are relative to the element's font size, and negative values are not permitted on this particular CSS property. So let's go ahead and let's create a style for line height. I'll come back up here and we'll create our next rule, which is going to be p.LineHeight, and I will open my curly brace and close my curly brace, and then we'll come in here and we'll go ahead and we'll specify line-height, and let's just use a percentage for this. So I'm going to say 150%, and I will use a semicolon. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to come down to my paragraph that talks about line height. Let me just put in a couple of breaks in here so we can see this a little bit easier. Oh, I have a break tag right there. So here's where I talk about line height. We'll go to this paragraph right here, and we'll assign a class. We may need to go ahead and resize our browser window so we can see this happening, but we'll do that momentarily. I'm going to save the page, and here's my line height. If I reload the page, you can see it just kind of pushed the text down a little. That's because this line of text is basically fitting on one line. But if I make my text, my web page anyways, more narrow, so this text line of text is forced to wrap, you can see compared to the paragraph above, this definitely has more space between the lines of the paragraph, and that's because I've increased it by 150%. If we change that number to something a little more drastic, like let's say 300%, you're going to really see a large jump in the space between these lines. So if we reload the space, you can see that it actually almost looks like more like a whole nother paragraph. Line height is again another nice sophisticated way that you can add some extra refinement to a web page by defining things that normally you're not able to define using just HTML or XHTML code. The next property that we'll be talking about is text transformation. Text transformation property allows text to be transformed basically by one of four properties, and those are capitalize, which capitalizes the first character of each word, uppercase, which capitalizes all the characters of each word, lowercase, which uses small letters for all characters of each word, or none, which is your initial value. So let's go ahead and let's do a text transformation style. So I'm going to come down here, p.text transform. I'll close my curly brace right there, and then I'm going to come here and define my declaration, which is text dash transform. And then I need to specify what I want, so let's just use capitalize. And then I need to come down to the paragraph that I want to apply that to. So here's where I talk about text transformation. I'm going to come to the first paragraph right there, and I'll set up my class to be text transform. And let's save our page, and let's refresh in the browser, and you can see that now the text, every single word, starts with a capital letter, like so. Okay? So this could be useful. It's definitely useful to do on headlines or something like that. If we change this instead, our rule from capitalized to uppercase, and we save and refresh, you're going to now see that every single letter turns uppercase. It's not just the first letter of every word. So you could certainly have some fun with that, and then lowercase would make every letter lowercase, and you could maybe find some good uses for that. The final property that we're going to be discussing is the vertical align property, and vertical align basically moves type up or down with respect to the baseline. This is, I find it to be most useful for creating superscript and subscript numbers. It's also the correct way to style like an asterisk or other markers like a footnote or something like that. Negative values are not permitted, and basically you have several values that you can assign here. They are baseline, which aligns the element to the baseline of the parent, middle, which aligns the vertical midpoint of an element with the baseline, sub, which does a default subscript, super, which does a superscript, text top, which aligns the top of an element and the parent's font, and text bottom, which aligns the bottom of an element to the parent's font. So you have a lot of different choices there. So let's go ahead and we'll create a couple of these so that you can kind of see them in motion. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to create two styles that we'll be using. So I'm going to come back to my page right here, and I'm going to do two classes. So these classes I'm not going to assign to a P because I don't want to affect the whole paragraph, because you wouldn't really see this actually happening. So I'm going to do vert align, and I'll call this one up, and then I'll close my curly brace, and what the property is that I'm going to change here is the vertical align, and we'll go ahead and we'll change this to a value instead of using one of these default values right here. I'm going to use negative 30%. And then what I'm going to do is I'm actually just going to copy this style. We'll just apply these both, and I'm going to call this one vertical align down, and then we'll change the alignment to a positive 30 here. So let's go down into our paragraph, and let's go ahead and let's assign this to some of the words. I am going to be using my span class to do this because I'm going to be affecting text that is going to be inline. Remember, we're not affecting the paragraph this time, but we're going to affect the text that is in line. So here I have the word up. So I'm going to move that text up a little bit. So I will open up a span tag, and I will assign a class to it, and I will assign my vert align up, and then I will close the span tag around the word up, and then I have the word down right here, and we'll do another span here, and this class is going to be the vert align down. And let's go ahead and let's close that span. And let's save the page right here. And if we refresh this, here's up and here's down, and you can see how it's just sitting here in my text. If I reload, you can see how, and I guess I got these backwards, I wasn't paying attention, but you guys get the idea. My up type is actually going down and my down type is actually going up. I just flip-flopped my numbers, so if I want to change that around so it makes more sense, I should have had the vertical align up as a positive number and my vertical align down as a negative number. So I'll just change that real quick and we'll refresh this page, and now you can see how this is being pushed up and this is being pushed down. So sometimes, like if you are using, you know, your default subscript or superscript, you don't get like a really nice flow of the words. So this is a really great way. The vertical alignment is a way that you can control this, you know, very, very precisely. And it's just good for aligning elements to each other. So we'll be visiting the vertical alignment a little more as well. But those essentially are your properties that you have available for styling text, and you can think of all kinds of useful ways to use those. We'll revisit this a little bit later on, working with it all together in a file so you can see how we kind of apply this in something that isn't just such a kind of generic example.